What's up guys, it's Brad from LightArchitect. In this video, I'm going to be doing a scene walkthrough of the searching helicopter visual effects shot that we recently uploaded a breakdown of on our channel. This specific video is not really a tutorial, but rather just a walkthrough going through some of the concepts used to create the shot. I'll be showing you the different steps we took in order to create the 3D scene and showing you the compositing process that we took in order to get the final shot. Now, some of the concepts in this video you may have seen before in some previous videos, but we also implemented some new techniques that I'll be making some in-depth tutorials on in the future on this channel as well. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. The first thing we did to create this shot was, of course, import our footage into Blender and 3D track the live action shot so that we could add any of our 3D elements that we wanted into the scene and have them match the movement of our camera. This was a fairly simple track as the shot is just a pretty stable drone shot just pushing through the sky here. I just used the detect features option and then cleaned up the track using the clean tracks button here. And I do have a tutorial on the 3D tracking process, so I'll put a link to that in the description below if you want to learn how to do this. It's a crucial step in your visual effects process. But anyways, I did a 3D track of the shot and then imported that tracking data into the 3D camera inside of Blender to match the movement of the CG shot to the live action world. So as you can see here, if I go to layout mode and go to viewpoint camera, you can see that, go ahead and turn off some of our elements here. You can see that our 3D camera now moves throughout Z space, just like our live action camera was moving through its environment. So anyways, that was the first step. The next thing I did was generally recreate the geometry of our live action shot inside of the computer. So as you can see here, if I go to solid view, you can see that I've added some various elements to recreate the general geometry of the scene. So I'll just kind of turn them off for now and go through them one by one. So as you can see here, the first thing I added was just a nice little background plane here, kind of generally matching the shape of the riverbed here. So pretty rough outline, but good enough to create a little bit of negative lighting from below on our CG helicopter anyway. So I added this ground plane here. Then of course I've added some bridge supports here. So you can see we have these structures here kind of supporting our bridge. So I recreated those. I just created one of them and then duplicated it along all four here. So we just kind of have a general outline of our CG environment. And I continued the process by creating the bridge base. And as you can see here, it's a pretty rudimentary outline of our 3D geometry in the scene. But the reason for that is because we're not really adding a lot of detailed elements intersecting with the geometry of the live action shot, but we are going to use the environment that we're building to create that mist pass that we can overlay on top of our live action shot, which I'll get into in the future. But anyways, that was our first step, just to create the geometry of our shot. In addition to these rudimentary elements, I also added the subway here, and you can see I just lined it up with the subway in our live action shot. And I didn't actually model this specific subway. I just downloaded and imported a royalty-free 3D model online, and then I just hand animated it to match the movement of our subway here. Now I thought about doing an object track for this specific element. However, the live action shot is moving at a constant speed, so I was able to just kind of line up the CG train to our live action one with just, you know, 4 different keyframes here. And while it's not perfect, it was looking pretty good, especially since the main thing that I wanted to add the CG train for was so that we could render some reflections from the helicopter spotlight on this train here. So we're not actually adding the CG train to the scene, we're just adding some light rays reflecting off of it. So since the spotlight on the helicopter was kind of panning around the space, the accuracy of both the track and the 3D model added didn't have to be quite as precise. But of course, depending on your shot, you may need to be more or less precise with this kind of environment recreation. But anyways, after recreating the geometry of the scene, the next thing I did was of course add our helicopter. So I just downloaded this model. This is just a helicopter model by Chris Kuhn on BlendSwap, and it's not a super high poly or heavily textured model, but I thought it looked pretty good and it was pre-rigged. So I was able to, you know, animate the helicopter going around the train with just a few keyframes, as you can see here. And for me, this was probably one of the trickiest aspects of the project, was just animating the helicopter in a way that that seemed fairly realistic. I worked on this project on and off over the course of a few days, so I'm pretty happy with the general result, but I definitely think the animation could be refined a bit better. But definitely the rig on the helicopter made it pretty easy to animate fairly quickly here. I also animated the spotlight here, and I also have a tutorial on how to create spotlights like this in Blender. Essentially what we have here, if I can just isolate this layer real quick, So for our helicopter, essentially what we have here for our spotlight setup is I have a cone here that I've added to the scene, as well as a spotlight effect here. So you can see our spotlight, which I've cranked up the power of in the lighting panel here. And then I've made the cone here a volumetric material in the shading tab here. So just a very simple principled volume shader into a material output node so that there was some volumetrics enabled in the actual cone here. So as you can see, if I go to rendered view, you can see that it's a fairly simple effect, just a volumetric shader, and then the actual light is blasting through the cone itself, which brightens it up. Of course, any other light would affect this volumetric as well. However, since the spotlight is much more intense compared to the other lights in the scene, it's doing a lot more and giving that fall off effect. So fairly simple effect for the spotlight. And yeah, I just parented the spotlight to the actual cone itself as a volumetric and played around with the animation so that it would hit our train here at the bottom of our frame. So just a little bit of trial and error there. The next thing I did was I wanted to add some grunge to the environment. So I actually added some nature grunge decals. And as you can see here, before I get too far ahead of myself, I've separated everything that I wanted to add to our scene into their own separate view layer, and then enabled only that element to show up on that view layer. And then I've made everything that I don't want on that view layer an indirect only or holdout. So everything that I've added to the scene can be separately composited into the scene with a lot more control in the compositing process. So for example, for the helicopter view layer, you can see that the only thing that I'm rendering on this view layer is the helicopter, and then everything else, even if I turn it on in our viewport, everything else is either indirect only or is going to be enabled as a holdout. So I hope that makes sense. I've essentially repeated the same process for every different element that I wanted to add to the scene here. And I'll talk about this a little bit later in the video as well, when we talk about our helicopter spotlight beam view layer as well. But anyways, the next thing that we added were these nature grunge decals. And I just wanted to add some grunge to these bridge supports here. So what I've done, as you can see here, if I go to rendered view on this view layer, you can see that I've just added some grunge elements on top of our geometry here. And actually for grunging up the environment, I've actually used our new add-on that is probably just being released as you're watching this video, because the version of it that I used is still a beta version. So by the time this video is out, however, the add-on will be released. But you can see in our right panel here, this is a beta version of the add-on that I was testing with this video. And you can see what this add-on is. Essentially, we have a variety of different texture decals to choose from. So for example, we have some scorch marks here you can add on top of your geometry, or if you want to add some graffiti, we have a variety of these to choose from. And again, this is the beta version that I'm showing you in this video. So in the version on Blender Market, there will be a lot more different assets to choose from. But essentially what we have here, I've just used some of the nature moss decals. And what you do with this add-on is you just select the object that you want to add the decal to, and then you select the decal you want to add to it, and then you click on add decal, and then essentially this will come into your scene, and you can just kind of stamp it on wherever you want to add your texture to. So it's a cool add-on that allows you to add some non-destructive texture detail to pretty much any asset or 3D environment inside of Blender. So we've just used some of our nature decals here. I've also used one of our graffiti skull decals here, and then of course I've added another graffiti element back here on the last bridge support here. But pretty cool little add-on. I'll be making some videos on it in the future as well. But I thought this was a nice way to add a little bit of texture detail to the scene. Of course, this is just overlaid in our render view. We had to comp it all together, which I'll show later in the video. But anyways, that was the next step we took in order to add a little bit of grunginess to the environment. As a final touch, I also added some snow to the shot. So as you can see here, select our snow emitter here. There we go. Now you can see some snow that we've added to our scene. We also used a preset from our weather effects add-on for this effect, but it's just a simple particle system with some snow attached, and then I just increased the amount of particles there. So just a simple little snow effect that we added that I thought would enhance the environment a bit and just add a little bit more depth to the scene. And yeah, essentially those are the elements that I added to the scene. Finally, the next step was to separate each element into their own specific view layer, so everything could be composited separately, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the things I wanted to do with this video that was new to me was actually having the spotlight interact interact with some 3D geometry in the scene. So again, that was the whole reason that I added the actual CG train car here and aligned it up with the live action one. So in order to actually get the CG train to be lit by our helicopter spotlight, I actually wanted to render out a glossy pass and then kind of comp it together with everything. So I'll show you what I've done on this specific view layer. So as you can see here, it's called subway car and bridge light interaction. So as you can see here, if I go to rendered view on this specific view layer, you can see that I've turned off all of the other light sources on this view layer except for our spotlight. And by doing that, we're able to more easily isolate the spotlight in our composite. To isolate everything further, what I've done is for this specific view layer, instead of rendering out the combined beauty pass, I've just rendered out the glossy direct and indirect. Because these 3D train models were fairly glossy, it was much easier to isolate the light hitting them by rendering out these two passes. So whenever you want some 3D interaction, it's always about recreating the live action shot as close as possible inside the computer, and then finding ways to blend those elements together. So as I mentioned, I just exported a direct and indirect glossy pass, and we can see what that looks like here. So you can see the glossy direct. So I was rendering out this pass, which is, just our spotlight essentially. Everything else is almost completely dark, which helps us to isolate this and then overlay it with a blend mode in the compositing process on top of our shot. And then I also rendered out a glossy indirect, which is just kind of that bounce lighting. This wasn't quite as important as the glossy direct for adding that spotlight effect on the train. However, I did use it a little bit to create a little bit of bounce on the other elements in our scene. But anyways, that was how I made the spotlight actually seemingly interact with the live action train. And I'll get into the compositing process now as well in order to show you guys a little bit more on that technique. But I'm going to make a specific tutorial on that in the future as well, essentially how to get your CG lighting to interact with your live action shot. So stay tuned for that, subscribe if you're interested, anyways, enough with the plug. But anyways, I've rendered out all of these separate view layers. Of course, before rendering, I added an HDRI of an environment that was similar to our live action shot. And then also, of course, you want to make sure that your CG lighting similarly matches your live action shot as well. So as you can see here from this live action shot, I can kind of tell that the sun is coming from the back left. You can see kind of on the subway car here that the light is coming generally from this direction. It's pretty low in the sky, which is why there's a lot of shadow. It's either the morning or the end of the day. But anyways, to replicate that general effect, in addition to our HDRI, I've just added a little sunlight just off to the left of our scene here. And since it was so low in the sky, generally when the sun is low in the sky, there's lots of clouds in front of it, which makes it very diffuse and very soft. So I've increased the size of this area light and then just made it a bit warmer, as you can see here. But anyways, guys, of course I rendered out all of my passes as a multi-layer OpenEXR sequence so I could get all of my different view layers and all the passes that I wanted in one file output. And then finally I got into the compositing process to bring everything together. Alright guys, so this is our compositing node setup here. It's a fairly simple setup, nothing too complex here, but I'll just go through it layer by layer in order to show you guys the steps that we've used to combine and adjust all these different view layers together in order to get our final shot. So anyways, the first thing we started with was of course our movie clip. So as you can see here, if I just add a viewer node, this is our starting point. Right here, our standard live action shot. The first thing that we overlaid on top of our footage was our helicopter here. From our OpenEXR sequence, we've just selected our helicopter layer. I'll go ahead and connect this viewer node to show our helicopter overlaid on top of our shot. You can see that the shadows are way too lifted here, but that's because we color corrected it to match the final shot, not just overlaid on top of our footage here. So we wanted to match it to the mist and everything else we added as well. But you can see we've added a variety of different effects on top of it. We've added some glare to the spotlight here. I rendered out an emission pass of our helicopter since we added a spotlight to the front of our helicopter. I'm not sure I went over that, but we added a little emission material to the front of our helicopter, and then I added some glare to that and then overlaid it on top of everything. But yeah, essentially just overlaid our helicopter element. I lifted the shadows a bit with some color correction nodes here, so you can see the helicopter without any of this color correction here. real quick, you can see that's our helicopter view layer. And then I've added all of these effects in between in order to overlay it with this alpha over node and combine it with our live action footage, which would give us this viewer output right here in a second. There we go. And the next thing that we added in our node compositing tree was our helicopter spotlight beam. So as you can see here, if I again bring over my fancy viewer node here and show what the spotlight beam view layer looks like by itself here. And as you can see here, I've enabled the train as well as the bridge geometry to be a holdout on this view layer so that the spotlight would only show up when it was in front of these objects. So that's a nice way to add a little bit of depth to your scene. But anyways, I've added some RGB curves to brighten up the spotlight beam, and then I've just blurred it a little bit as well to blend it into our environment, take the edge off the sharpness of everything. So as you can see here, once we added our spotlight, we get something like this. And right now the volumetrics of the spotlight don't make sense at all because of course we don't have the mist added to our environment. If there are no volumetrics in your environment, why would there be the spotlight lighting up volumetrics that aren't there? So of course we need to add our mist on top of this and then bring everything a little bit darker in our post-production process as well in order to actually make this make sense. So both these two elements will come together, both the lifted shadows of the helicopter as well as the spotlight beam effect, once we add that mist on top of everything and darken it down a bit. But anyways, the next thing that we added were our Grunge Decals from our texture stamps add-on. So if I bring over our viewer node, we've just combined it here. So this is our texture stamps render, and we've just literally added no effects to this at all, but we have used a soft light mix node here. So we're using a little bit of a different blend mode to blend everything together. And again, it doesn't look perfect right now, but once we bring it down and add that mist, everything will be blended together. So keep in mind, I'm combining all of these together and then tweaking them in that process. I'm not trying to make the helicopter look perfect as soon as I add it. I want to combine everything and then adjust from there. But different people have different processes, obviously. This is just mine. And yeah, the next thing that we added after adding our grunged up environment and changing the blend mode a bit here, I added our train and helicopter light interaction. So as you can see here, I've used our Glossy Direct and Glossy Indirect paths and added them together here and played around with the factor a bit. So I'll show you guys what we've done here. If I can bring our viewer node. So as I showed you before, here's our Glossy Direct pass, which is that perfect, spotlight effect. And then I combined it with our Glossy Indirect just slightly to add a little bit of bounce lighting as well. And then I've, added some blur to it, added some glare. So you can see the different effects that we've added to it. You can see there's some glare there. You can see all these effects, increase the RGB curves. You can start to see some artifacts here, but then once we combine it on top of our footage, we get something like this. So what I did is I gathered the data that I thought was necessary in order to replicate this spotlight effect and then overlay it on top of our train. And then I just played around with the blend modes essentially. So I've used the soft light blend mode here, which worked out pretty well. But of course, you can use a variety of different blend modes, like here's add. If you don't want it to darken down the footage as well, you can play around here. Of course, you'll have to color correct accordingly, but you can kind of play around with these blend modes here. Now that you've captured the data through your different passes that you want, you can play around with it and try to get the result that you want. So again, I used our soft light blend mode, and I thought it looked pretty nice because it's bringing down the train at the areas other than where the spotlight is hitting. So I thought I gave a nice look to the shot. Then on top of our spotlight interaction, I've added our snow pass here, and I've added a little bit of RGB curves to bring down the brightness a bit, and then a little bit of blur to it as well to blend it into the shot. So you can see, just use an alpha over node to combine our snow on top of everything. So there you go. And finally, I've rendered out the geometry with a mist pass, which is one of my favorite things to add to scenes. Just mist makes a lot of things really cinematic. So as you can see here, just a mist pass of our environment. And I do have a tutorial on this concept as well. I have a tutorial on how you can pretty much add mist to any live action or CG shot. So I'll put a link to that in the description as well. But a fairly simple concept. Essentially, as I mentioned, just recreating the geometry of the scene and then exporting a mist pass of that geometry. So just overlaid that with some color balance. As you can see, I've added a little bit of green to it to stylize it a bit. But yeah, after adding that mist almost, we get something like this, which is pretty close to our final result. I was pretty happy with this. You can see that it's not perfect. You know, our spotlight, I don't think would be going out this far. I think it would be fading off a bit. However, I was pretty happy with the result for, you know, around a day of working on this. I was pretty pleased with it. So didn't really feel like tweaking any longer, especially since I'm trying to get these videos out to you guys as well. But yeah, these are all of our passes combined on top of each other. In order to stylize this a little bit more, I gave it a little bit of color correction. And then I'm a big fan of adding a little bit of lens distortion on top of things. A lot of people don't like adding lens distortion, but I kind of like a little bit of a gritty look. Of course, it depends on the style of shot you're going for, but you can see adding that lens distortion, you can see the distortion here, the little bit of chromatic aberration. I think it kind of helps blend everything together a bit more. Obviously, it depends on the shot. However, I'm a big fan of adding a little bit of imperfections to give the shot a little bit of character. But yeah, this is our final result. I did add a little bit of color correction in our editing software as well, but this was the final shot out of the composite. And yeah, I was pretty happy with the result. But anyways, guys, I hope this video was helpful. As always, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys would like to see next on this channel, whether that be more compositing tricks, some visual effects quick tips. I'm happy to take any suggestions in the comment section below. I do try to read and respond to all of the comments you guys leave. I really appreciate all the support on the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.